Colombia is one step closer to a final peace agreement, and the Mexican government finally agrees to a meeting with the teachers' unions. For teleSur's, my name is Reagan, and this is From the South. Thank you so much for being here with us. First up, after years of talks, the Colombian government has reached a deal with the FARC guerrillas for a bilateral ceasefire. The agreement marks a historic moment for Colombia after a 50-year civil war. The agreement is expected to be signed on Thursday afternoon in Havana. And with the more in-depth look at what this historic agreement means, we go to our correspondent in Bogotá, Natalia Margarita.
Almost 4 years after Colombia's peace talks began, negotiators in Havana have achieved an agreement for the implementation of a bilateral and definitive ceasefire. The news followed a unilateral ceasefire implemented by the FARC roughly a year ago, which has de-escalated violence to levels never seen during more than 50 years of armed conflict.
The average deaths per day when the peace process began compared to the average deaths per day during 50 years of conflict have led us to believe that roughly 1,500 lives have been saved during the 3.5 years of peace talks.
The details of the deal will be announced in an event led by Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, the FARC's head Timo León Jiménez, and Cuban President Raúl Castro. Chile's Michelle Bachelet and Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro, as well as UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, will also be present when the parties disclose the agreement on the bilateral ceasefire, as well as on the laying down of weapons and safety guarantees for the FARC.
That involves the areas where the FARC would be located, as well as the political, economic and civilian reintegration of the FARC members according to their own interests, but also as a strategic point to dismantle the organizations that can be considered inheritors of the paramilitary phenomenon, with safety guarantees not just for the FARC, but the social movement as a whole.
The issue of paramilitarism has been a heightened concern for social and human rights organizations that have suffered the violence from paramilitary groups operating along with state agents and political forces. The connivance between paramilitarism and the state is considered by many as the main threat to peace in Colombia.
Even if the government continues to refuse calling paramilitary groups by their name, the fact that it commits to a serious fight against paramilitarism is a necessary step, not just for the success of the peace agreements, but more importantly, because of the urgent need for Colombian society and the millions of people living in rural areas of the country.
The issues of a bilateral ceasefire, laying down of arms and safety guarantees are all part of the third point of the negotiation agenda. Having already reached an agreement on that, the final point under discussion is the legal binding and implementation of the overall peace accords. Natalia Margarita, teleSur, Bogotá, Colombia.
In Mexico, just 2 days after a teachers' protest that left a deadly toll, health workers in Oaxaca and nationwide have launched a national strike. The doctors are rejecting a reform plan designed by the government, which seeks to privatize access to public health. The Mexican government has announced that it is willing to sit down with striking teachers after police fired on civilians and teachers in Oaxaca, killing over 10 people. Interior Minister Osorio Chong has agreed to meet with representatives of the CNTE Teachers Union to discuss the controversial education reform which has generated the opposition of the teachers over the past 3 years. The reform will significantly reduce teachers' rights and will base their positions on periodical tests. A day after the Inti Raymi celebrations marking the new solar year, President Evo Morales has proposed a change in the calendar used by Bolivia. Morales says the country should adopt the solar calendar since it is more organized. The Morales administration has been characterized by its efforts to promote indigenous culture. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has made yet another attempt to initiate dialogue with the opposition. Maduro invited leading figures within the opposition to reconsider their refusal to speak with the government and to collaborate in working towards solving the country's economic crisis. Maduro's call comes as the Organization for American States, the OAS, is set to hold a meeting to discuss the political situation in Venezuela. President Maduro also met with the U.S. Undersecretary of State Thomas Shannon. The U.S. diplomat will also meet with other government officials, opposition leaders, and members of civil society while in Caracas to help ease the political situation. Students at public universities in Honduras are urging the government to stop education privatization attempts, and teachers are joining them. teleSur's Geraldo Torres reports.
In the last month, the university has opened 11 cases against student leaders and is accusing them of criminal activities and vandalism. If convicted, some students could face jail. Some have decided to temporarily leave the country.
The problem we have at the university is that power is overtly centralized, and only one way of thinking is allowed. That is very antiquated attitude, in which the authorities are the owners of the truth. You can hear them speak, particularly the university president, who believes that only what she says is correct.
The students are currently occupying 4 campuses around the country. They are committed to stopping what they believe is a push to privatize the university by handing many areas of academic services over to private banks. The students are also demanding that their right to protest be respected. Geraldo Torres, teleSur, Honduras.
The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has issued a warning to the United Kingdom just one day ahead of the EU referendum. Juncker said, quote, "Out is out." He added that Britain would not be able to make any changes to a package of measures that the country agreed to with EU governments in February. Thousands of people took part in memorial events around the world to celebrate the life of British MP Joe Cox. Her widower, Brendan Cox, led the memorial event at Trafalgar Square in London on the day the MP would have turned 42. Tributes also took place in New York, Geneva, and Paris. Her husband called her death an act of terror.
Joe's killing was political. It was an act of terror designed to advance an agenda of hatred towards others. What a beautiful irony it is that an act designed to advance hatred has instead generated such an outpouring of love.
The French government made a U-turn earlier this Wednesday, saying that trade unions could hold a protest march in Paris. This after previously telling police to ban the demonstration scheduled for Thursday. However, after holding an emergency meeting with the unions, the Interior Minister said that violence would not be tolerated. Head of German automaker Volkswagen, Michael Müller, tried to appease angry investors at the company's annual shareholders meeting. This was the first meeting since the emissions scandal hit the company, causing its stock to drop. Müller stressed that the company has made a lot of progress since then, but admitted that the company still had a long way to go. Turkey and Israel are set to announce a deal on the normalization of bilateral ties this week. The deal would end 6 years of frozen diplomatic relations sparked by Israel's bloody raid on the Gaza-bound Marmara aid ship. More on the story with teleSur's Noor Harazin.
To announce this week a deal on the normalization of bilateral ties that end a 6-year diplomatic crisis between the two sides. Turkey's daily Hurriyet reported on the expected agreement Tuesday, saying that intensive talks have resulted in a compromise on a partial lifting of the Israeli blockade imposed on the Gaza Strip in a way to show Turkey's solidarity with the coastal enclave. Announcement would be made after final talks between top Turkish and Israeli officials on June 26. A formal agreement would be signed in July, the paper said. Ankara froze relations with Israel after Israeli commandos raided the Turkish-owned Mavi Marmara ship in Gaza's international waters in May 2010. During the raid, 10 Turkish nationals were killed. In September the same year, Turkey suspended ties with Israel and exiled Israel's envoy in Ankara over Tel Aviv's refusal to apologize for killing the Turkish victims.
The return of bilateral relations between Israel and Turkey is more beneficial to Israel. Turkey has tons of crises and problems that it can't impose any terms on Israel. It was clear from the beginning that any reconciliation agreement between the two sides will not result in substantial changes in Israel's policies towards the Gaza Strip. Israel wants to stabilize the blockade. However, a few gains will be beneficial to Gazans.
According to the paper, two of Ankara's preconditions of finalizing the deal have largely been met: an apology and a compensation for the families of the Marmara victims. Regarding Gaza, Israel has allegedly vowed to take moves that would improve the plight of Gazans and ease the blockade. Under terms of the deal, Israel will allow the completion of a Turkish hospital in the coastal region, as well as the construction of a new power station and a distillation plant for drinking water. Turkey will also send aid to Gaza via the Israeli port of Ashdod. Noor Harazin, teleSur's TV, Gaza.
India has successfully launched a rocket carrying a record 20 satellites from its space station. The successful mission makes it the highest ever number of satellites on a single Indian mission and the third highest in history. Most of the satellites will enter orbit to observe and measure the Earth's atmosphere. One of them aims to provide service for amateur radio operators. 4 times golf major champion Rory McIlroy will not compete in this summer's Olympic Games in Brazil. McIlroy cited health fears over the Zika virus there. This despite the fact that golf has returned to the Olympics for the first time since the year 1904. Denmark's Queen Margrethe has designed the set for a new production of the classic fairy tale Cinderella. The show will premiere at the Copenhagen Tivoli on June 25th. But this is not the first time the Queen has designed a set. She has designed some 5 sets since 2001. There is more on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English, and as well you can join us on Facebook, Instagram and on Twitter. From all of us here at teleSur, have a great evening. Bye.